For most of aviation history, airlines really did own their own planes. In the mid-20th century, that wasn't just normal, it was expected. Back then, airlines were symbols of national identity. Pan Am represented the United States, BOAC represented Britain, and Air France represented France. Owning aircraft was a matter of prestige. If your flag flew on the tail, the state almost certainly helped pay for it. Governments guaranteed loans, absorbed losses, and saw their national carrier as part of foreign policy as much as business. It made sense in that era. Air travel was tightly regulated, passenger demand was predictable, and competition was limited. Buying planes outright gave airlines control over their fleets and confidence in long-term planning. Many carriers even owned their own maintenance hangars, catering divisions, and training centres. They were vertically integrated empires, producing, operating, and servicing everything themselves. Then the economics changed. The 1970s brought two oil crises that sent fuel prices skyrocketing and pushed the first wide-body jets into service. Airlines that had looked profitable suddenly burned too much fuel and carried too many seats. Airlines were stuck with billions of dollars in equipment they couldn't easily sell. For the first time in history, owning planes felt risky. At the same time, deregulation arrived. The US Airline Deregulation Act of 1978, followed later by similar moves in Europe and Asia, opened the door to competition. Dozens of new carriers entered the market, unrestrained by the old fare control systems. Legacy airlines now faced smaller rivals that didn't need to buy fleets outright. They could charter or borrow aircraft instead. For established national carriers, this was certainly a shock. The very thing that once symbolized strength, owning everything, had become a liability. Debt from aircraft purchases limited flexibility, while upstart competitors could expand or shrink overnight. By the early 1980s, the old model of full ownership was collapsing under its own weight. Airlines began selling older planes, delaying new orders, and experimenting with short-term leases to cover gaps in capacity. The industry had learned a painful lesson. Control was expensive, and flexibility was survival. What airlines needed was a way to keep flying without carrying the full financial burden of ownership, or a way to use planes without having to own them. And that solution would emerge not in Seattle or London, but in a small town on the west coast of Ireland. In the 1970s, Ireland had no aircraft manufacturing, no major airlines, and very little aviation industry at all. But it did have one thing: a young airline executive named Tony Ryan. Ryan worked for Aer Lingus, where he noticed a quirk in how the airline managed its smaller planes. When it didn't need them, it would lease them to other carriers for a few months and earn easy revenue. To Ryan, that looked like a business model waiting to happen. In 1975, he left Aer Lingus and founded Guinness P Aviation, or GPA. Its idea was simple: buy aircraft in bulk, then rent them to the airlines that couldn't afford to buy their own. It was the world's first dedicated aircraft leasing company, and at first no one thought it would work. Airlines had always owned their planes, leasing seemed temporary, even risky. But deregulation was creating a new type of airline, smaller, fast-growing, and desperate for cheap, flexible access to jets. For them, leasing solved almost every problem. Here's how it worked. GPA would buy a new aircraft directly from Boeing or Airbus using borrowed money and big order discounts. It would then lease the jet to an airline for a fixed monthly fee, typically for 8 to 12 years. When the term ended, the aircraft would be repainted and sent to another airline somewhere else in the world. That simple idea transformed the economics of flying. Airlines could now expand or shrink their fleets almost overnight without taking on huge long-term debt. Lease payments could be counted as operating expenses, not capital investment, keeping balance sheets light and investors happy. For lessors, the appeal was stability. Aircraft held their value well, and rent came in every month. Soon, others copied the model, banks, insurers, and investment firms all realizing that aircraft were a new, mobile form of real estate asset. And Ireland's low tax laws and English language contracts made it the natural home for this new industry. GPA itself grew too fast and nearly collapsed in 1992, but by then the idea had spread. Its aircraft were absorbed by larger financiers like GE Capital Aviation Services, which carried the model into the modern era. And by the mid-1900s, about 15% of the world's commercial fleet was leased. It would only go up from there, because airlines had discovered something powerful. In the new world of aviation, it was better to rent the sky than to own it outright. Today, roughly half of all commercial aircraft in the world aren't owned by airlines that fly them. They're owned by a few dozen companies you've probably never heard of. Firms based in places like Dublin, Singapore, and Hong Kong that together control the majority of the world's airliner fleet. The biggest of them, AerCap, Avalon, SMBC Aviation Capital, and Airlines Corporation, each own or manage hundreds, sometimes thousands of aircraft. AerCap alone has a portfolio larger than the entire fleets of British Airways, Lufthansa, and Emirates combined. It's an arrangement that's turned Dublin, home to more than 1,000 aircraft leasing companies, into the financial capital of the aviation world. Billions of dollars in aircraft assets are technically registered to quiet office parks and holding companies scattered across Ireland. From the outside, airlines still look the same. They paint their logos on the tail and advertise our fleet. But behind the scenes, the real owners are these financial middlemen, the landlords of the sky, whose decisions quietly shape what, where, and how the world flies. Over the past 3 decades, aircraft leasing has quietly taken over the aviation industry. In 1990, only about 15% of commercial aircraft were leased. Today, it's more than half, and still rising. That growth has completely reshaped how airlines and manufacturers operate. Lessors effectively decide which airlines get aircraft, how quickly they can grow, and at what cost. And for Boeing and Airbus, leasing companies are now indispensable. Instead of waiting for airlines to commit to new purchases, manufacturers can sell hundreds of planes to lessors, who then distribute them around the world. It smooths out production and guarantees steady revenue even when individual airlines hesitate. In fact, in some years, up to 2/3 of new aircraft deliveries go directly to leasing firms. This concentration of ownership has also changed the geography of global aviation. Ireland, thanks to its low taxes and favourable legal system, has become the world's leasing capital. Over 1,000 aviation leasing firms, from global giants like AerCap to small investment vehicles, are registered in or managed from Dublin. The city now handles an estimated $150 billion worth of assets, a third of the country's entire GDP. For airlines, this dominance makes scaling up operations easier, but that convenience comes at a cost. Lease rates depend on global interest rates and market demand, so when financing tightens, so does access to aircraft. Smaller airlines often compete for the same limited pool of jets, pushing up prices. And when global crises hit, like in 2020, the web of ownership can make problems spread fast. Still, the appeal is undeniable. Leasing has turned aviation into an asset-light industry, where airlines focus on branding and logistics, while lessors handle the billions tied up in metal. In a sense, it's a separation of labour. Airlines fly the planes, but lessors own the sky. And while this system seems efficient, it also hides a growing vulnerability, one that would be exposed the moment global travel came to a sudden stop. In 2020, as the pandemic shut down air travel, thousands of aircraft were grounded. Airlines couldn't pay their leases, and lessors suddenly owned hundreds of planes that no one wanted. Many negotiated payment deferrals or temporary rate cuts just to keep airlines alive. A few smaller lessors collapsed outright. For the first time, the industry realised how interconnected it had become, and how quickly that interconnection could unravel. Then just 2 years later, another shock hit. When Russia invaded Ukraine, Western sanctions required foreign-owned aircraft to be returned, but Russian airlines refused. Over 400 leased planes worth more than $10 billion were effectively seized overnight. Most are still in Russia today, re-registered under new ownership, with lessors and insurers fighting lengthy court cases over compensation. These crises showed both sides of leasing's paradox. It makes aviation flexible and efficient during growth, but dangerously fragile during disruption. Even though leasing now dominates commercial aviation, not every airline plays along. A handful of carriers still believe in the old-fashioned idea of ownership, and for them it's not about pride, it's about control. Take Emirates, for example. The airline owns the majority of its massive fleet outright, including nearly all of its A380s. Owning those planes gives Emirates freedom to operate them far beyond what's typical in a lease cycle. It can decide when to refurbish, retire, or reconfigure them without asking anyone's permission, something no lease fleet allows. Delta Airlines is another case study in ownership. Rather than relying on lessors, Delta often buys older aircraft at steep discounts and maintains them in-house. It has one of the largest maintenance and engineering divisions in the world, capable of overhauling engines and refurbishing interiors internally. This vertical integration means Delta can run older aircraft economically, long after other carriers have moved on. For a company built on reliability and brand consistency, ownership simply fits its strategy. Then there's Lufthansa, which uses a mixed model, owning much of its long-haul fleet while leasing smaller or regional jets. That balance gives it stability where it matters and flexibility where it doesn't. So why do these airlines choose to buy when leasing looks so convenient? Well, for one, ownership can be cheaper in the long run. Lease payments include financing costs and the lessor's profit margin, which means airlines that can afford to buy with low-interest debt usually pay less over an aircraft's lifetime. Owning also locks in long-term stability. Lease rates rise and fall with interest rates and demand cycles, but owned aircraft are immune to market swings. But there's also a deeper strategic reason. For bigger, established carriers with predictable traffic and access to capital, ownership means independence. They can plan decades ahead without being exposed to leasing markets or competing for scarce aircraft. Still, most airlines today mix both approaches, owning core long-haul fleets while leasing to fill seasonal or short-term needs. It's a hybrid system that reflects aviation's new reality. Ownership is still useful, but flexibility rules the skies. Because in modern aviation, it's rarely about who owns the planes. It's about who can use them the best. Airline leasing isn't just here to stay, it's still growing. Analysts expect that by the end of this decade, nearly 2/3 of the world's commercial fleet will be leased. That's a level of financial interdependence the industry has never seen before. But the model itself is changing. The fastest growing part of the business today isn't traditional operating leases. It's something called sale and lease back. Here's how it works. An airline buys a new aircraft directly from the manufacturer, then immediately sells it to a lessor and leases it back. The airline gets instant cash to pay down debt or invest elsewhere, while the lessor gains a reliable long-term customer. It's a financial sleight of hand that keeps airlines light and liquid, and leasing companies rich in assets. But meanwhile, the leasing industry is starting to grapple with new challenges. Now, Chinese companies are rapidly expanding their fleets, often backed by state banks. China is positioning itself not just as a manufacturing powerhouse, but as a financial one, quietly acquiring influence over how global airlines access aircraft. And then there's technology. As smaller electric and hybrid aircraft begin to emerge, lessors are already experimenting with new ownership models, shared leasing, short-term rentals, and even pay-per-hour usage schemes. Future aircraft might be financed more like software subscriptions than long-term loans. Yet despite all these changes, one thing remains constant. Airlines still need planes, and most still can't afford to own them all. So they'll keep renting. And the lessors, the quiet financial backbone of the industry, will keep expanding their hold. Because in modern aviation, the true measure of power isn't who flies the most routes or carries the most passengers. It's who controls the planes. The planes may wear different liveries, fly under different brands, and connect different continents. But behind nearly every single one of them, ownership traces back to the same small network of financiers who quite literally own the sky.